Yes, we are back after a I call it brief hiatus from the Instagram lives. But we are back. We said we're going to come back. We've committed to come back to another 12 Sundays for all this property talk. I know a lot of you have probably just watched the football. Hopefully there's not too many sad Liverpool, fans in here. But we have got another amazing guest. So these are always going to be saved for the YouTube. So if you're not already, make sure you go and subscribe. And we're going to get talking property. So whilst he waits to join, it's fine. I'll just talk you through. How's it going, brother? You all right?
Yes, mate. Yes, I'm very well. How are you?
I finally convinced you to come out on a Sunday.
Well, I'm sorry to disturb your trip to Dubai. You should be
It's
out
all right.
partying, no?
I just had to buy some data as I wasn't sure. So probably going to keep on to about half an hour just to make sure that I don't cut out mid conversation.
Yeah, no worries.
You all good?
Yeah, all good. Yeah, pretty dramatic afternoon, eh? I think I
Yeah.
certainly didn't realise the time when we agreed this, but
You know what? I didn't even, and I was like, do you know what? It fits in all right. I set her, have some food, watch the football, and it wasn't too bad. So I hope we don't have too many upset Scousers in the building. We've got some people that can still enjoy some valuable property conversations. But for those
yeah.
that maybe are not familiar with you, do you want to give a brief introduction to yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Charlie Sullivan. My Instagram handle is Capstone Fox.
Mm-hmm.
Set up Capstone Fox back in 2017. Property investment and development company. Previously I was a chartered mechanical engineer in the offshore oil and gas and renewables industry, and then did that for about 10 years, and then moved into property full time, pretty much when I started a family, and have been doing houses up ever since.
I've been seeing you got some really interesting projects. Little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. But in the meantime, if anybody's got any questions for Charlie, make sure you use the question box, just so everyone can see what we're discussing and hopefully can get some good information. So my first question to a lot of people, particularly people that don't start in property first, Carmen, you said obviously the family was the driver behind wanting to get into property or wanting to pivot from what you were doing full time. But what was it about property that made you say, you know what, that's something that I actually want to get my teeth into?
Yeah, I guess there's a trigger for everybody, isn't there? There's something that kind of pushes them to do something, whether it's property or whatever industry. For me, it really started back in 2009. That was when the seed was sown, and my dad, he was an engineer. He was my kind of my Superman, the guy I looked up to, big inspiration in my life. And prior to him running his own engineering companies, he'd had success being a property developer. And so I wrote to him, actually, me and my best mate, Rory, who was my best man at my wedding. We were sort of young lads in our early 20s, sat having a beer one night, talking about becoming, billionaires before we're 30. And we had this idea that we were going to buy an end terrace in Bradford, right? And because Rory's from Bradford, and we were like, let's turn it into a shop downstairs and a flat above, and we'll make double the income. And what a genius idea, And so we wrote to the only person that we knew really who had any experience in property, and that was my dad. And just sort of asked for his advice, on how to get started. And he wrote back to me a letter that at the time I didn't realize how significant this letter would be. But it turned out to basically be the last thing I ever got from my dad. 3 days later, he passed away. He died he died in a helicopter crash, basically. And this letter that he sent me was pretty much a blueprint on how to buy, refurb and refinance property. And he basically said, look, let's get a meeting together. Let's have a day. We can plan it all out. And, unfortunately, I never got to have that day with my dad. And I share that story, not to try and like shock or for it to be a sort of like, a sad backstory or anything like that, but it was a turning point for me. And I cherished that letter. And I actually did nothing with it for 10 years. I went off into industry, had success there, and it was only when kids came along that I sort of dug it out again. And and start to look into it. And that's how our property investment company began, really.
Well, I mean, I can't remember what I was reading recently. I think it was the book *Sapiens*, and they were talking about, like before, when, because it took so, like, when you say snail mail and writing a letter, because it took time and took a time to get a response, we used to only write things down that actually had real significance, and that is, okay, that communication was like, okay, something that we're going to do, going to put something down. You might not get a reply back for a week or a couple of weeks, because
Yeah.
that's, people consider what they write. But definitely, it's a conversation that, I think is interesting. I think your motivation, obviously, you've seen what your dad had done in property. You kind of, to a degree, sort of took some time away because of, the circumstances, and my condolences. But then in the long term, it was like you said, you had that blueprint effectively to, how to potentially operate and how to negotiate the markets of property. Because when somebody says they want to get into property, there's so many different things that you could want to do. And I think I have to get, not your letter, but like a snippet, the modern day version of, I've had this amazing idea, but for whatever reason, it doesn't really make sense, potentially like converting that end of terrace to commercial with not understanding with, that the requirements to convert, from different types. But I think it's the passion, though. It's the impetus that, I've seen it. I can see how potentially I can maneuver an asset to be profitable. And that's really the bones of property investment.
Yeah, I was excited to do something, entrepreneurial. I was inspired by my dad, and like for several years, I didn't really want to talk about it. I felt a bit like I didn't want to use it as a crutch or some sort of like sales tactic, or anything like that. But like, you can't help it. It's my story. It's what it happened to me. I didn't want it to happen, but in a way, like that event was a massive springboard in that. Losing that figure in my life was like, I had to then go find those answers from other people. So, I'm not shy to ask for help. And I think in today's society, everybody wants to be the best, be known as the best, be seen as, I'm self-made and all of this. I'm not self-made. I don't think anyone is. I think, I'm a product of all of the input from many different people in my life. And I'm not shy to ask for help and try and be humble enough to say, listen, I haven't got the answers. Can you help me? And so kind of losing such a significant influence in my life at an early age meant I went out and I went hunting for that information, and I went to father figures, and I said, listen,
Where
can
did you actually go? Like, when you decided that you wanted to start investing in property, where did you go to fill in the gaps?
initially I read a book called 3 Feet from Gold, which is one of the Napoleon Hill books, and it kind of documents this guy who goes around interviewing really successful people and sort of kind of asking them, trying to see common traits and things that they did. And I started to read around that and a bit of self-development. And then, like many people, kind of responded to one of these Facebook adverts about property training. And we actually went and did some property training with one of the property education companies. We didn't have the money. I was in the corporate world, but a lot, like, the sort of the story goes on that I got shares and we floated on the stock market. But prior to all of that, I was tied in. I couldn't use, like, realize the value of those shares. So we had to get creative. So yeah, we did some training. We got a coach and a mentor. And in some ways it was kind of like we had to make it work because it was a lot of money for us at the time. And that was sort of the start of our journey. But it was triggered by, a lot of these things I was hearing about. Property is a great route to wealth. You make your money when you buy, not when you sell. Have a little black book of trades. I've still got my little black book that I take my notes and all that.
In that, we can really overcomplicate property sometimes, but there is some really key pillars that, as a starting point, it's not going to guarantee you find all the deals, but it's going to guarantee when you do find what is potentially a deal, how you can make it work and how you can maneuver in the space. And those two things you just touched on in terms of making money when you buy, for everybody you speak to, like, you hear that from pretty much everybody, and there's not like a truer sentence, in the whole of property. If you buy at the wrong price, you're almost sort of doomed from the beginning. So
Yeah,
somebody
yeah.
has asked a question, sort of as a starting point for the Q&A. What advice would, what would you advise to someone that's recently started in property? They have one property already, so it's quite vague, but I guess it's kind of you can go for some sort of more generic advice.
Yeah, I think the first thing is take your time in just assessing your options. There's a lot of noise and information out there. I think there's a lot more now even than when we started, and we weren't that long ago. And
Yeah,
even now, the property education market's changed. The way that the access you've got to information now. I think lockdown's been a big part of that. You know, a lot of people jumping online a lot more than maybe they did. So yeah, I'd say firstly, depends on your starting position. If you've got a ton of money, then you know, work with somebody closely who's doing what you want to do and can help create a plan and help you build the portfolio. If you don't, you know, you're going to need to raise capital either through your own means, earning income, savings, or external investment, and time. You know, everybody probably feels short on time. But I was working full time, traveling all over the world. My wife was working full time. We had kids. Like, and I speak to people all the time who say, I haven't got the time. And I'm like, if I sat down with you and looked at your diary tomorrow, I'm pretty sure I could find a few hours, you know. Like
yeah. You
we
see, you know, everybody says they haven't got time, but you make time for the things that you prioritize. And at the
Yeah,
point in
exactly.
time,
Yeah.
your property journey or you know your whatever it is that you're doing becomes your priority,
Yeah.
when you'll find the time. So again, yes, if anybody's got any questions, it's sort of generally obviously about developments or getting into property, or it can be in terms of managing projects or finding deals, etc. But definitely make sure you use that question box. So I've got a question for you. I've seen some of your more recent projects. So I'd
Mm.
like to go to one of them that I found really interesting, which is the Chappell conversion.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's is that am I right in saying that's in the north of Wales?
North
Or
Wales. Yeah. Wales is a bit bigger than you thought, isn't it?
yeah, because I was doing my development tours. So we've got the new series on YouTube, which is the like sort of luxury development tours. We went to go and see a project with Tej, Boxall Homes, ACO, who are doing a really nice conversion from this old BBC recording studio into
Wow.
6 Muse houses and 3 luxury flats. And I was like, yeah, while I'm in Wales, I'm just going to pop by and see everybody. And then I said, yeah, Wales is. Yeah, this is what happens when you're from South London and don't
That's
leave.
it, man. You Southerners.
Is like the size of London. So I said, yeah, I'm gonna have to circle back round and come and see you shortly. But I am gonna come and see that project very soon. It is gonna be
Yeah.
one of the sites that we come and see for our development tours, and they're really good because you get to see people that have bought their first property and they're refurbing their own residential property to
Mm.
people that are doing new builds of, you know, sort of 30 units plus in zone 2, zone 1, zone
Yeah.
2. So really good for just people that want to get a feel of where they are and where potentially property can take them. So go on, talk
Mm.
us through that Chappell project. Where did you find it?
The deal was actually brought to me by someone who is now a business partner, a guy called Greg. Shout out Greg, and he's on Instagram. His Instagram handles Nest Properties, and
Hmm.
Greg and I actually connected through social media on LinkedIn. And I think you know, I documented my leaving the corporate world and moving into property through LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And Greg and I had a chat through LinkedIn. Greg was working in the corporate world at the time and wanted to get out. And, you know, we'd had a call and a chat. That was it, really. And then next thing I know, I get a message in my inbox to say, this chapel's come up in North Wales. It's on my doorstep. I think it could be an amazing deal. But, you know, I'm sort of like, I wouldn't know how to kind of do it by myself. So, you know, like I'm a sucker for a deal. Like I was in sales and strategy and business development, and I started to look through this deal and just thought, like, I know North Wales, used to holiday there as a kid, and you know, I've got a lot of nostalgic memories there. And I think I just said to Greg, like, can we get a viewing on Monday?
Yeah.
And so we met in a pub about an hour before the viewing, and I remember Greg was like really excited, telling me all about the deal, and I think I just said something like don't worry about the deal, just tell me about yourself. And we just chatted for an hour over a pint about, you know, vision, values, family, that kind of thing. And then we went along to the chapel. We met the owner, And the story goes that basically he gave us his price. He would give us a little bit off the asking price, but he wanted it done in 2 weeks. And so we were like, okay, give us a few minutes. We were stood inside the Chappell room. He went outside. Greg and I had a chat and basically agreed that, look, we've got to be willing to walk away from this. We can't do it in 2 weeks, so let's just be honest with him. And I kind of knew from my sort of background in sales that you sort of lay your offer out and then go quiet, and then the next person who speaks loses. And so we went outside, and the owner was like, right, okay, lads, what's it going to be? And we just said, look, we love it. We can really see ourselves doing something great here. We can do your price. We can't do 2 weeks. And that was it. We just went quiet. And he went, what can you do? And that was it. I knew at that point we got the deal, and we managed. Yeah.
I think you highlighted in that conversation a load of really key points, and we'll get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty about that, the Chappell conversion itself. But I think one of the first things is, when you are trying to get into property or trying to build a business or start something new, you have to be able to identify that you potentially can't do everything. Yeah. And a lot of the time it does mean, doing some type of joint venture or partnership or bringing on the right people, which obviously Greg, he found the deal, but he just knew he wasn't able to execute it. But rather than say, okay, well, I'm going to wait till I can, because the thing is, good deals don't wait around. He found somebody that he was able to network with, connect with, that would facilitate being able to make it possible, because it's better to have 50% of something than 100% of nothing. The other side of it is also, when you are JV, and another really important part is it's a relationship. So making sure that you're actually aligned, that your long-term goals aligned, your short-term goals aligned, and even just as people that you sort of click and can get on. Because the worst thing is starting a relationship with somebody that you can't maintain, because it's a recipe for disaster. So I think that's, if people are looking to start something, it can be a rent-to-rent business, it can be a sourcing business, but those, honest and frank conversations about where do you see yourself in the next year? Is property just something to make money for something else? Is it a long-term project? I think are really important to have sort of day one.
Yeah, I think, and I think we kind of set off on the basis of, pulling in the same direction, willing to work together. We identified different strengths, and, Greg is hugely capable. It wasn't that he wasn't able to do the project. I think it was more the confidence thing and sharing the risk and the responsibilities as well. So, and there was a risk, I guess, that we both took, because we didn't really know each other. But again, I don't know, this probably isn't widely used business advice. Well, it depends who you ask, but I just had a gut feel. I can't really explain it any other way than that. I went with my discernment and my gut to go, do you know what? I feel like there's something here that we can do together, and I back myself and my belief in my business partner. And, it's taken a while to get to where we are now, but we're really motoring now and excited to bring the project to fruition, really.
I think it's weird because you can't teach gut feelings. If you're telling somebody about why they trust their gut, but a lot of the time it is something very primal in ourselves that just knows what a good is. I couldn't say it necessarily. I think I've had this thing where whenever I park outside a property, again, London, traffic wardens everywhere, every time I get a parking ticket, it tends to be a really good deal. So that's something random. Time that it like you said, in terms of gut instincts, it doesn't matter what somebody's salary is, job is. When it comes to tenants, if I get a bad feeling about somebody on the viewing, I'm normally always right. And a few times I've gone against, I've been the bane of my life. It's 50 emails a year, 100 emails from one. So what is it? The actual Chappell project is a conversion into flats. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's a grade 2 listed former chapel, Welsh chapel it's actually a city of 3,000 people in St Asaph in North Wales in Denbighshire. And when we bought it unconditionally, so it didn't have the planning in place that we wanted, but it had been partially converted, and that to some degree reduced the risk in our eyes, because it had resi upstairs and downstairs was a storeroom. So, we agreed the deal knowing that there'd be more work to do in terms of finding out from the conservation officer and planning whether we could get what we wanted. and we submitted a planning application. Initially, and this is probably a mistake on our part, which we chatted about recently, was we thought, get the most out of the building that you can. So our plan was take the chapel floor out, put 2 floors in, so it was effectively like a 3-story building, and have 7 apartments. Disappeared. Oh, there we go.
I'm back.
You get that?
I'm basically on pay. I'm basically on pay as you go. I ran out of data again. But this,
Flipping property developers, mate.
this is my commitment to the Instagram, to the content, to the Instagram live, that I've spent another £6.35 to make sure that we keep the ball rolling.
How long we got?
So we'll say we've got about another 15-20 minutes to say, just to make sure it doesn't cut at the end.
No worries.
But yeah, no. So I caught the beginning bit, and sort of it answered one of the questions in regards to, did you actually have planning beforehand? So how many units did you actually end up getting? Because I think I lost you a little bit there.
Yeah. So the first planning app that we put in was very extreme, in the sense of we went for the most amount of units, so 7 apartments over 3 floors, and we had to build in a new floor. That just escalated the costs of the refurb, particularly in the middle of lockdown when everything was going up. And we ended up going back into planning and reverting to keeping the 2 floors that were there and just having 5 apartments. So we've now got 2 2-bed apartments on the ground floor, which is the chapel floor, and then downstairs, which is the lower ground floor, we've got 3 1-bed apartments. So 5 in total.
Get the planning for the 7 units.
Yeah. Yeah.
The first developer that's gone back in and said, excuse me, can we actually have less units?
Yeah, and the first one took about 8. Yeah, the first one took about 8 months, and we had all kinds of challenges. The second one went through in about 2 months.
Yeah. And that's the good thing that I really like about conversions, that when you do it the other way, sometimes you can go in, play a little bit safe with your first application, make sure that you've got something. If you've got maybe expensive finance, now that you've got your planning in place, you can get something that's a little bit cheaper, because you can base it with GDV, and you can still go back in, because once you've got the planning, they can't remove it, can't take it away. So that is a good way to do it as well. Yeah. Would you say, how have you found it, like operating during lockdown and during material prices increases and everything else?
I think on the one hand, it's been frustrating, the time element. I think Greg and I have both been frustrated about how long it's taken. And some of that's been because of the change of plan. Some of it's been down to the council and getting it through planning. But then the flip side of it is that the original numbers that we did for the GDV and the value of the apartments is probably now somewhere about 50% higher. The area's gone bonkers. And that's why the 5-unit scheme stacks and works. So it was all like, we kept saying through the process, like, it's going up in value every day that we own it, so long as we end up delivering what we're planning to do. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It's like frustrating that it didn't happen quicker, but if it had done, we may have ended up with something that wasn't quite as good as what we've got now.
Yeah. And then, so question for you, because I get asked this a lot, I don't know if you do as well, but particularly people that are looking to start out soon, one of them, apart from sort of how do I get into property, once people have decided, they picked a strategy potentially, the next thing that I get asked a lot is, do I think there's going to be a crash? That's the go-to question. And not so much, do you think there's going to be a crash, but even if you were new to property now, is it still something in this current market you still look to get into, or would you be trying to predict the market?
Yeah, I would, all day. Like I'm my training, if you like, for corporate world, I'm an engineer, so I reverse engineer everything back to the simplest way I can understand it. Like my uncle used to be brilliant with a gun. He could take a gun apart and put it back together, and he'd have bits left over and it'd still work. And my dad would say that's a really good engineer, like break it down to the simplest components and make it work. in my head, and I remember this, my dad and other like successful developers that I've met have said, in the UK, we live on an island, okay? It's a big island, but we live on an island with a growing population and a shortage of housing. It's a simple case of supply and demand. You know, you bring good quality stock to the market, people will pay good prices. And I've never been somebody who's lived with a spirit of fear. You know, like I want to live with a spirit of faith and somebody who's got an eye in growth, not in shrinking back. Do you know what I mean? And that's not to say I'm daft and I won't listen to the signs, but again, my gut's telling me just keep building. You know, keep moving forwards.
I think that's definitely sort of my stance as well. Like my background's economics, so much like you sort of take everything back to. I literally always go back to supply and demand and very basics, but just go back to the numbers and I look at, you know, yeah, there could be a dip. Like I'm not silly. You feel the reasons why there could be a dip, but relatively speaking, if you compare how prices have increased over the last 4 years to how much they dropped by during the most recent recession, 2007, 2008, you'll be better off if you invested, you know, if you invested the day before that recession and then held them for the last 3 or 4 years that we've had, you'd still be in a better position. So in an ideal world, you'd love to time the market, but I think the reality is the time is now, because as you mentioned, like the UK governments have underachieved on the production of new homes year on year for the last decade. We're still getting loads of foreign investment. There's, you know, growing population. There's so many like sort of factors that are making that demand more buoyant that, you know, I think it's a really good place to be. And as you touched on, if you give a quality stock, even if there is a slight fall in demand, and you do kind of make sure that you have a contingency within your budgets and within your deals, I think it's maybe a case of making less money as opposed to a case of losing money.
Yeah. And I like, as my portfolio and my experience grows, I'm doing different strategies, and they're almost like a barometer for me of where the market's at. So I can look at my buy-to-lets or my HMOs or my serviced accommodation or commercial conversions, and I can see real time, you know, how the market's responding. And so all my eggs aren't in one basket. And you know, I know a lot of people who do, they go hell for leather on one particular strategy, and that's cool. I've always kind of been more sort of project led and things that interest me. And I think a lot of it is down to sort of my reason for doing property is I'm not looking to be some sort of magnate, you know, to claim I've got a certain number of properties like that. That's not me. Like for me, it's the quality of life for my family. It's about also being able to make a difference. You know, I really enjoy the fact that in property, you're not just able to be smart with building wealth, but you can also provide quality homes, and the doors that it's open for me in terms of being able to help other people build and scale portfolios is really, really rewarding. So I've got that, and then I've got people that I work with one-to-one who are building in different parts of the country, and so I can see, okay, they're doing a lot of SA in this particular area, whereas other people are moving more towards social housing, and I've almost got like a real-time map of it all now, you know, just through people that I'm working with, that network.
Which is great. Like, so whether it is, I know that you, like you said, you work and help other people build their own portfolios or build their own sort of, you know, their own sort of help to curate their journey within property. Which is really good. And also you get to sort of network and socialize with different people in the property space and see what they're doing. We'll go on to somebody else. I'm not sure if you've actually done it. Have you done any ground up developments?
No, I haven't yet. That's something that I've got in the works. I've got rods in the water, yeah.
On the to-do list. I think that's the fun thing about property. You can just have stuff that you can say, like, I want to do. Like I've been saying for ages, I want to do a building with a lift. That's like my. It was just on. So like, I don't even really want to, because technically the lift's really expensive. I don't. There's this thing about just having a lift and saying, yeah, like, you know, we built a lift. Just sounds fun. So I'm sure maybe I'm trying to think who's coming on in the next couple of weeks. I know there is somebody. So Remind, keep that question. Tune back in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I have a very close friend who does ground up developments, and we chat all the time. And in some ways, like I have more headaches than he does, you know, when it comes to surprises and uncertainties on builds. And I don't know where the gas pipes are or the electrics are on my developments, and he's like, I'll put them where I want. So like,
With
but
new,
there's
they
always,
sort of say
yeah,
once you're out of the ground, you're kind of safe. It's just Lego after that. You just, depending on what type of construction you're doing, after that
yeah,
you're a lot safer.
yeah,
Whereas a conversion, you know, you're in the middle of doing something. You take, like, I don't know, you take back all the floors and you realize, oh, all the joists are rotten. They weren't costed
yeah,
into the project, and now
yeah.
they all need replacing.
That's it, yeah. But there's always a bit of a lag in what I post and what I'm doing versus what I've got in the background. And that's certainly like where I live. I live in Cheshire, a place called Wilmslow, which is South Manchester. You've got places like Prestbury, Alderley Edge, Wilmslow, really like high value areas in the northwest where they're prime and there's a lot of development ongoing. And if you can get the plots, they stack all day long. So that's something that I'm working on as we speak in terms of realizing some of those opportunities. But it's sort of running in parallel to the other things that I'm doing.
So, in regards to obviously the current market, we sort of joke about regularly. It's hard to find a deal. You can offer 100K over asking and still get told, yeah, your deal's not, your offer's not even on the table. How are
Yeah.
you going about sourcing deals? You said you've got sort of your rods in the water. Looking like, what are you doing actively to make sure you maintain your pipeline?
So what I found is that there are deals out there if you're looking in the right areas. And I know that sounds a bit like I'm generalizing, but everything you do, whether when you're viewing a property, you'll get feedback. Okay. And I take that feedback and review it. So it might be, 10 other people were bidding on it and it went well over the asking price. Like there's things you learn. Just because you lose out on a deal doesn't mean that you're bad at property or you haven't offered enough. It could tell you something about that area that might be predominantly for owner occupiers or overseas investors or whatever. And so when I sort of work with people one to one, you get that feedback. And sometimes you say, well, we're going to have to just look at a slightly different area. And I bring it all back to ultimately what's the kind of goal and the thing that we're working towards. Is it a financial figure per month? Is it something per year? And if that's the case, it's just a box that makes money, So you've kind of got to, I suppose, target certain areas with certain strategies. So the way that I do it is I've spent time finding areas that work for what I do. But even some of those areas have become harder and harder to find deals in. So then I have to move and look for new areas that may be on the fringe or on the outskirts. I still buy stuff through Rightmove, still finding deals there. I love auctions. I don't necessarily love on the day actually doing it. That's always a bit of a sweaty, anxious
Yeah.
time. And no matter how much people go, yeah, I'm ice cold. I'm not bothered. Like you are. Like
Do you
when you.
miss in-person auctions?
When there were in-person auctions, I know they've come back now, but I would often do a telephone proxy bid because it's like you're in the room, but nobody knows you're in the room.
I
And
like to in people's eyes.
well, and again, like I get asked about auctions. I went to 3 auctions before I bought anything at auction, and I've seen it all. Like my brother-in-law nearly won a lot that he didn't bid on, and they say you can't win a lot. Like they say you can't accidentally bid. He did. He scratched his nose. He was the highest bidder on a 2-bed apartment in North Shields. He didn't want a 2-bed apartment in North Shields, and thankfully somebody outbid him. and I learned a lot. I watched people go nuts in that room and overbid on stuff. But yeah, auctions are a great place. And again, a lot of this is consistency. Like I think property comes in waves, doesn't it? Things come on the market for a period and then they go off, and then a new wave of stuff comes in. And what I see in a lot of people starting out is they have a go at a few and they get disheartened, so they give up. And what they don't realize is it's this principle of like, you're 3 feet from gold. You've just got to keep going. Like the numbers thing and the consistency is all part of winning. Like, but you've got to lose a few first. And that's hard, particularly if you come from a sales background and you're used to seeing energy in equals results out, yeah, it's they're sort of the main things. Rightmove. I get some direct to vendor stuff, get stuff through letting agents. I get people send me stuff now on social media, just building a social media following. Everyone thinks I'm a Chappell expert. I'm not. I haven't done one yet, but
This is the thing with property, because property content is slow. Like it's not like, if you're the chef that does meals, you can be doing a roast one day, a seafood boil the next day, and some vegan stuff the following day, and every day you're just cooking something new. So people think, oh, it's the general chef. But if you're doing a Chappell conversion, that's pretty much you for a good year. So people assume
Yeah.
you're the guy that does the Chappell conversions until, you know what I mean, you start doing something
Yeah.
else. Or you've got 1,000 projects on the go at once.
I've joked that I should change my Instagram to Charlie Chappell and see what happens. Maybe that's all we should do. But I have
Yeah,
certainly learned a lot, you know. But
yeah,
every chapel's different. Yeah.
exactly. I think I didn't really get scarred, but I just had like stress with a sort of a grade 2 listed building once. And I think from there, like it was quite early on. So in my head now, I hear listed and I say run.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. But so do most, and that was kind of why we bought it, because we got
yeah,
this chapel for 135 grand, you know, and we thought, flipping out, if we can't get this to work, we probably shouldn't do property, you know, let's pick another industry.
and that's it. And I think, you know, we had this conversation in the past, but as much as I joke to say that, well, I don't joke, it's very true. I do hide from listed buildings, but
Mm,
I naturally look at that and think, oh, it's not really for me. The same
mm.
way some other people would look at stuff and see subsidence and be like, yeah, that's a red flag, I'm not going near it. But I see subsidence and I'm like, oh, gimme, like
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I've
yeah.
it enough times and I know problems that are an easy fix, a difficult fix, and what the cost of those are, that
Mm,
particularly in a tough market, it's about being able to find the solutions and looking
yeah,
at something, how you can make it work. No one's going to
yeah,
walk up to you and say, here's the deal, it's really easy, go and do it, because they'll either sell it for a massive premium to somebody else or they'll do it themselves.
yeah,
So there is, when people say, how do you find the deal? It is the hard work, whether it's Rightmove, Zoopla, whether it's the auctions and knowing when to stop, knowing that what you could potentially pay that little bit more for because because of previous experience you could potentially go up an extra 2 floors, get some commercial unit
mm,
attached under PD, and it's all about understanding these things that mean that you can, as you touched on, like take this box and make
mm.
it as much as possible, but at the same
Yeah,
time create really nice homes, which I think
exactly.
yeah,
And
one of the
that's where this. Yeah.
remember what the first project of yours that I saw that I really liked. I don't follow that many people, and I saw something. I was like, "Well, this looks like a bit of me."
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm doing a big pub at the moment, which
Mm,
again was a kind of like got it really cheap and just thought if I can't make this work, I might as well quit property. And it was a gut thing, you know. I just sat and had a cup of tea with a vendor, and I wasn't looking for a pub in the area to do
mm.
12 apartments, but it landed, and I went, go on then, let's have a
Yeah,
go, you know. Like fortune favors the brave and all that.
and I think for one of the most common questions I get asked, how do I start? How do I start? Like you just have to physically start. Like you have to
Yeah,
start. You have to start that motion, and yeah, of course you want to be going in the right direction. But there's so many different directions that property can take you in that the
yeah,
reality is motion is going to what's be the catalyst or what's going to propel you into working out what you
mm,
actually are good at or what you do like or where you can find the deals that work for you. So I think for
yeah,
people that where do I start, you actually have to start, like you have to do
yeah.
something.
Yeah, and look, if there's one thing I can sort of get across on this call, it's that I make so many mistakes. But again, I look back and I had advice once. I think it was my dad again who said, so long as you get 51% of the decisions right, you're winning. And I think you just got to embrace it, don't you? Like I knew we'd get kicked in the nuts and all kinds of stuff would go wrong along the way, but like just keep failing forward, picking yourself back up, yeah, and crack on. Like none of us are perfect. We all do things wrong, and I think to try and project this image of like I'm better than everybody because all my deals go right. Well, you're either going through a lucky spell or you're lying. And I learn the most when those things go wrong, and I know it's character building, and it teaches me for the next time. So bring it on. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a smart one. I like that one. You got a couple good catchphrases.
Yeah, I've got a few. Yeah.
Couple good catchphrases. Because that's the thing. The thing with that thing about as long as you're getting 51% of your decisions right, you're winning. You have to think some of the most profitable industries in this world, like take casinos, for example.
Yeah.
They all happily, have their roulette, blackjack that realistically are only maybe sort of 45 to 55 weighted and they're billion, probably $1 trillion industries.
Yeah.
So, you don't have to be perfect, but you just have to be
Yeah.
doing a bit more good than you're doing bad, and then you
Exactly.
work out else along the way. Look, I would love to sit and chat with you all day, but unfortunately, you know, my data, my £6, gonna
Sit man.
have to get started. But I think obviously for those that have enjoyed this, make sure you go and subscribe to the YouTube. Because I'm going to be getting you on when obviously we do the development tour of the chapel and potentially some of your other projects when we do. I'm going to tie you in with my sort of Manchester / Midlands leg. I'm going to try.
You know where
Yeah,
Manchester is, yeah?
yeah, no, no. What I'm going to do is we're going to do it over 4 days. We've got a couple
Yeah.
sites we've got to go and see in Manchester, and we're going to work our way back down slowly to, you know, to South London where I feel at home. So I'll bring my passport in case I
That's
get
good, mate.
lost.
Yeah, and bring your big coat, yeah?
Yeah, all right, yeah. What, man, summer we're open for. Little decent weather in Wales, or you're not promising anything?
Nah, sideways rain. Always dress for the winter up here, yeah. Unless you're going to Newcastle, because they don't wear coats up there.
Oh, fair enough, fair enough. I'll bet. Listen, appreciate everybody for logging in today. We are back. We're going to be consistent now with the Instagram lives back each and every Sunday with an amazing guest. If you've caught the tail end of this, it's going to be available on the YouTube. We're sort of backlogged, so if you want to catch it earlier, I think it's out on Spotify. I'm going to have to double check. But again,
I'll
appreciate
share it. I'll share it on my post as well, yeah.
you. Yeah, apologies for all the scousers in here. It's a bad day, but you know what I mean. You're probably going to go and find a deal tomorrow because, you know, it's that work-life balance, isn't it?
That's it. They're still on for the treble, aren't they? So don't feel too bad for them.
I mean, a treble, but they've, you know, they won 2 on penalties. So, you know, but you know, we go. Anyway, I appreciate you coming on. Yeah, we'll definitely catch up soon. Thank you everyone for
Great.
joining.
Thanks
Take
for having me,
care.
Kazi. Thanks a lot, everyone. Cheers. Have a good night. Bye.